Um, and we also do like harm reduction, integration, and preparation services for folks otherwise doing some experimenting or exploring their own healing. Most recently started as the president, the inaugural founding president of the board of Enthio, Illinois, which is the advocacy coalition that is putting forth the CURE Act, House Bill 1 in Illinois, which is our psilocybin, our answer to the psilocybin services legislation of sorts. And yeah, I think that's good for now.
Yeah, I think that's good. And then in regards to Illinois' CURE Act, could you talk about that a little bit? And then any particulars you want to highlight from that? I'm sure we'll be into some conversation on the details, but figured I'd let you sort of introduce that to the group.
Yeah, so first things first, I'll add the fact sheet and then the actual really long ass piece of legislation for you all to peruse. But so the CURE Act kind of does primarily two things. In the broad scheme of things, it starts by creating the regulatory program for psilocybin-assisted therapy, and also deschedules psilocybin, so removing psilocin from the Illinois Controlled Substances Act. So it's sort of a two-pronged piece. The descheduling would be immediate when it's enacted, and then the psilocybin services component is essentially the development of an advisory board that would make recommendations to the Illinois Department of Public Health and various other regulatory departments within Illinois for that actual that services program. So it includes licensing manufacturers, testing labs, individual psilocybin facilitators, and psilocybin service centers where folks can obtain psilocybin and also receive services. I was going to say something else about that and I lost my train of thought, but that's the general sort of bird's eye view of the bill.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. And also it allows for expungement of prior arrests or prior charges for psilocybin related stuff. And part of the role of the advisory board is to also consider other substances to include into the descheduling and possible services components as well. So other like MDMA, other entheogens.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that goes a little bit into my next piece regarding basically what improvements / lessons learned that the campaign has taken from Measure 109. I know you had the campaign manager for that, I believe Sam Chapman, SSDPer, probably also SSDPer for life, yeah. On a group conversation regarding the CURE Act a couple months ago. So it seems like a lot of these campaigns are both sort of working together and figuring out how they want their psychedelic therapies, psilocybin therapies to come into being, become implemented. What are some things you've learned from Measure 109 that you were either wanted to make sure were implemented or not implemented with the CURE Act?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I'll note that the representative, the co-sponsor or the chief sponsor rather, Representative Ford, was intrigued by Measure 109 and some of these other initiatives in other states, and essentially like gave the model legislation to first Jean Lacey, who's the executive director of Enthio, Illinois, who reached out to me to participate in the process. So Rep. Ford had seen this and was like, how can we do this? So Measure 109 sort of started out almost as our template, and that's sort of what we worked off of. And we sort of Illinoisified it, right? Had to change some of the language based on our own state law to start. And then one of my favorite things that we changed was the age limits. So we bumped that down to 18. Like I said, SSDP for life. So definitely being able to represent the youth voice as much as possible is really important. We have a SSDP representative on our advisory committee, Taylor, who's sort of our call to represent youth voices in like all legislation, right? Like that there should be a seat at the table for young people. And so that was really exciting. Some other things just in general that I think are important to highlight is not requiring any particular diagnosis for someone to seek services. So I know in some of the legislation that exists, they have to have particular types of psychological conditions. And we, again, for accessibility reasons and to ensure that people had broader access, kind of removed that piece of it. We included some additional players in who should be included in the advisory board, including nurses, including veterans, which is a common one for folks to for the programs to include, and also I'm trying to think what else, harm reductionists, things like this. So kind of looking at how else we can bring in more folks from the community to represent the development of the actual services program. And so the advisory board would, like I said, advise the Department of Public Health based on what we know of the science and safety. We also included some additional things around, actually written into the bill, around some of the training components. So including things around ethics, safety, harm reduction, and also a clear pathway for folks to report any sort of harm or ethical violations within the system. So those are some of the things that are kind of coming up to mind. And like I said, including recommendations regarding what other substances like ibogaine, mescaline, except from peyote, and botanical forms of DMT could be included in the framework. So starts with psilocybin, but allows for the advisory board to consider other substances.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good. And you touched on this a little bit, but how did you, in conversations with other people, determine the desired makeup of the psilocybin advisory board? And if you could, are there any certain, I suppose, seats that you'd like to highlight as important in future psychedelic therapy issues?
Yeah, let me pull up the actual list of what is included in the advisory board so I don't miss anything. One sec here. Okay, so this includes a state employee with technical expertise in the field of public health, a local health officer, someone who's a member of a federally recognized Indian tribe in the state, individual who's a member represents advisory body regarding addiction and mental health, someone representing health equity policy, someone representing palliative care and quality of life, someone who represents individuals who provide public health services, a psychologist licensed to practice in Illinois, a psychiatrist licensed to practice in Illinois, a therapist licensed to practice. So this opens up the space for master's level and social workers and other types of therapists and counselors to be involved. A physician, a naturopathic physician, an academic public health person, a VA services person, someone who has professional experience conducting scientific research on psychedelic compounds in clinical therapy, someone in the field of mycology, someone in the field of ethnobotany, a psychopharmacologist, and a psilocybin harm reductionist. Then, of course, we have like the required ones, like someone representing the Illinois Liquor Commission, so someone with experience in the system, like this, so like the Cannabis Regulation Tax Act. So those are sort of like the officers who would be on the advisory board, and those would be, appointed by the governor, for the most part.
Okay, and then I think out of that list, is there one or two you'd want to highlight in terms of either them being very important when it comes to legislation, or like a seat that you think might not be on the top of organizers' minds in other states that you want to highlight?
Yeah, like therapists who aren't psychologists, health equity experts, mycologists, ethnobotanists, psychedelic harm reductionists. Those are the ones that feel important to me to highlight.
Yeah, I think
they may be in other states, but those are the ones that feel important to me too.
Okay, and I think for this, now we're getting down to a few more questions that I have, but I think it would be a good time to put any questions you have in the chat, unless you want to bring this up in conversation. I think I'll also just throw it over to you when you want to ask a question to have a conversation with Vil. But yeah, I just wanted to throw that out now so we have some questions for Vil as we move forward here. And then I think we're going to have more general conversation around topics that come up. I'm not sure if that part's going to be recorded, but we shall see. So yeah, looking in here, you probably also touched on this a little bit before, but something that obviously is important when it comes to psychedelic therapies is accessibility. The federal government is making that a lot harder by criminalizing psilocybin, which both makes the licensure difficult around this issue, it seems, and also just makes the psilocybin expensive. So what are some things you'd like to highlight in terms of how the Cure Act is working for as much accessibility as the federal government will allow?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that we sort of felt was important was, to not bend to capitalistic interests. So folks can only purchase or obtain psilocybin from a service center, a licensed service psilocybin service center. So there's not going to be like retail sales, which could go either way, right? That could drive the cost up for psilocybin, but also with removing psilocybin from the Illinois Controlled Substances Act, right? So it's going to be descheduled. There's no longer going to be punitive response to psilocybin in the state of Illinois in general. So, being able to manufacture, grow your own kind of psilocybin would be one way where people might have a little more access to that if they're experimenting on their own. And a big factor of the work of Enthio, Illinois, is to provide education and harm reduction around this to the community. So folks who are going to maybe be experimenting on their own can do so with some knowledge.
Okay, I have a bit more questions on the service centers. Is it sort of like a nonprofit or medical thing? I'm just not familiar with the implementation of this. And I'd also like to see how Oregon did it, if you know how they're implementing it.
So yeah, the service center is a clinic or an office. It's pretty broadly defined. Let me pull up the definition in the So the service center is like any sort of premises. And so it can include, public-private enclosed areas at the location, so at a business. I'm trying to find the actual. So it doesn't include a primary residence unless that's necessary for provision of psilocybin to someone who's like a hospice patient. So the service center is like a clinic where someone can go and receive services. And it's not the only place that someone might be able to receive psychedelic assisted or psilocybin assisted therapy, given certain conditions or certain factors at play. But generally, it's like a clinic, a medical office. So it's where the administration session happens. So where someone actually will have psilocybin, where the psilocybin is purchased, and other services may be provided. So it's pretty broad as to how it's defined, but it is a space, a center, office, where those things can happen.
Okay, and I think my next question here might answer Danny's question in the chat, but something we were mentioning on the last policy council is the differences between descheduling and decriminalizing. So this is I guess, among other things, it's a descheduling of psilocybin and psilocin. And what are some things that made that a more logical choice in this case? And what are some things that might be allowed that would not necessarily be allowed in, let's say, like something that's just decriminalizing possession and use? That might answer the home grow question, and then we can answer anything else that comes up.
Yeah, so the descheduling was really sort of a product of the fact that to include decriminalization would include creating new rules and regulations. So it was just like more to do that would be more complex and complicated, where just removing it from the scheduling system is pretty simple. So that's one major factor there.
Okay, that sounds good to me. And then I guess for the answer, the question on the home grow, would that, my understanding is that home grow would be allowed then because it's not scheduled. Is that the case?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, we're talking about that a little bit with the policy council tactical team before, but okay, that's good. Yeah, and it's just something for us to consider moving forward with other, drug decriminalization, drug scheduling, descheduling things. So that's good to note here. Yeah, I was kind of focusing around that a lot. So does anyone have any questions? I think now would be a good time to bring that up. And then I think we can have a more decentralized conversation around this issue. Okay, well, that sounds good. So I think this is where it kind of becomes more of a conversation. So I'm just going to stop recording. Okay, one more thing. What is the estimated cost of treatment?
We don't know.
Okay.
That really depends a lot on the rules and regulations that the advisory board comes up with. If we were to use like what the current system, the current protocols of like the clinical trials, an example that we have is with MDMA, and currently right now in the expanded access process, I think it's around $50,000. Hopefully this is not the case because psilocybin is a lot easier to make. So it grows. So it would probably be cheaper just to manufacture and all of that. So that's a big factor. And there, there's other like pieces in place as far as developing like a funding stream for scholarships or trainees, as well as for patients going through the process. So it really just kind of depends on what the rules and regulations and the licensing and all of that and the training costs will be, and how that ultimately lands to what the consumer, what the patient has to pay.
Okay. Do we have any estimates from Oregon yet? I know they're just implementing. So
Sure. Yeah, I don't know.
yeah. Okay, looks like we have a few more questions in the chat though. Let me just go up to this. And thank you everyone for writing down stuff. I got Danny's first one. We'll go to Taylor next. What would you take from your experience to recommend to other states looking to do similar things?
I'd say first and foremost, go to your community first, rather than, big corporations. Find out what the community actually wants and needs out of something like this before, bringing in folks who may be more motivated by, money than healing. So that's been one of the things that we've take some pride in, is the fact that we really focused on our communities and reaching out and doing, we've had a few different like town halls, getting community input about the bill, which has been really helpful for us. It's also been a really helpful way to demonstrate to the representative and, the folks that are on that side of things, to see like what people are actually wanting out of this. And so to provide a bit of like evidence of like how we need to do things for things like descheduling and including that in there. I think being able to speak with the community and get their buy-in and get their input was really crucial for that.
Awesome. I think that was a really good answer. I'm going to go to Danny's next question. Do the treatment centers specifically allow for fungal extracted sources of psilocybin in order to increase access to treatment?
In order to decrease access to treatment, increase access. I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Again, that would be something that would be up to the advisory board as far as like what the manufacturing process will allow for. So we don't have those details yet, but I would hope that yes. Again, as far as accessibility is concerned, we would want, to be, considering all those options.
And then Danny, I might actually throw it to you for a little bit because I'm still learning, about psychedelic therapies. So could you give me an example of what a fungal extracted source of psilocybin is and how it would decrease cost barriers? Because I'm not really sure about that.
Well, I understand that MAPS has had to deal with a specific manufacturing standard, and that has increased their overall costs for, actually doing the FDA studies to get it actually FDA regulated. So psilocybin and psilocin can be produced without using a fungal source. So it can also potentially be cheaper to actually extract it out of the fungus, to get that psilocybin/psilocin. So I think it's primarily, I think a lot of people don't trust fungal or, non-pharmaceutically produced source. And I think it's important to influence the statute from the get-go to decrease the overall cost, which increases the access to treatment by specifically allowing for a fungally extracted source. I think that a lot of clinicians don't like the inconsistencies around using mushrooms themselves, because they can have, active compounds that aren't the psilocybin or psilocin. It can affect the experience and affect the consistency of treatment. So I think that's why generally people like to have consistent medicines and treatment for consistent outcomes. But specifically for extracting from a fungal source, I think it's important.
Yeah, so that's why we've got, ethnobotanists, mycologists, and those sorts of folks with that kind of expertise on the advisory board, to be able to weigh in and provide that information. I think it's super important that we understand like that quality control is a big factor, right? And so that's going to be part of those rules and regulations developed by the advisory board to determine like what the quality control looks like for that, with an eye on accessibility, hopefully. Yeah, thanks, Danny. And I saw Taylor's question about somewhere, or no, that was Lou's question. Sorry.
Yes.
About the types of services offered at the services center. So the services center itself can provide all different types of services, right? So like, for example, we would think that Sonic Healing Collective would potentially be a services center if we were able to get licensed. So we provide a variety of mental health services, like ketamine assisted therapy, psychedelic harm reduction, integration, and we would also could provide psilocybin assisted therapy if we were licensed to do so, and that can happen individually and in group, because we do group work as well. And again, but that, yeah, like some of the details of that, you know, if they were to somehow limit the kinds of services that could be provided in a service center, like that could be a possibility. That maybe, you know, they only do one kind of, you know, entheogenic assisted therapy for some reason. I don't know why they would do that, but like, you know, that's the kind of thing that maybe the advisory board would determine. But generally, you know, there isn't anything in the law as it's written that would preclude these services centers from providing other types of services.
Okay, sounds good. The next question is mine. Have there been any conversations in any states to potentially offer a subsidy for individuals either making under a certain amount or subsidize people with certain criteria, let's say like a PTSD diagnosis as an example?
So you're talking about for someone actually like a patient or a client actually seeking the services?
Yes.
Yeah, so there's one of the things that is in this bill is a, let's see if I can find the actual wording of it. Yes, the Psilocybin Control and Regulation Fund, and the Illinois Psilocybin Fund. And so those things would possibly be able to then be utilized for things like subsidies or scholarships or, you know, training, you know, training opportunities, things like that to offset some of those costs.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds good to me. Yeah. So looking at the chat and my personal notes, I don't think there are any more questions here. I'm going to give it another minute. And then I think the final thing would just be, Vil, anything you want to add, a pitch for Sonic Healing Collective, Enthio, Illinois, any action items you want to say? Just going to give it a little bit more time and then you can take it.
Yeah. Yeah, so, well, one of the things we're working on is an action campaign for Illinois residents to reach out to their representatives to co-sponsor the bill. So Rob is currently working on putting that together on the back end of things for us. So we've written out all the content of it. It just needs to go up on the website. So we're gonna check, you know, make sure it all works and everything next week. And hopefully by the end of the week, we'll be ready to actually like put that alert out. So if you know anyone in Illinois or are in Illinois yourself, please keep an eye out for that. And, you know, otherwise you can go to Enthio-IL.org and check out the website. You can sign up for newsletter. We have a Instagram and Facebook account where you can keep up to date to things. You can donate to the cause if you're able to. That would be helpful because, like, you know, got to pay the lobbyist, I guess. So I guess that's the thing. But yeah, otherwise, if you know people in Illinois, make sure to share that action item with them when it comes out.
All right, well, sounds good. I think we'll just keep this more open conversation, but the recording is over. So goodbye, anyone watching this after the fact. Hope you had a good time.